Today I'm going to tell you the story of Marcus Sullivan, a hermit rancher who lived alone for 20 years in the Arizona desert, when a naked Apache woman named Aiasha knocked crying at his door, fleeing from slavers who had destroyed her family. Their encounter would transform two broken souls into an unstoppable force for justice. But the ending exceeded all expectations, the knock that changed everything. The Arizona Territory moon hung full and bright over the remote desert ranch of Marcus Sullivan as he settled into his evening routine, the same pattern he had followed for the past 20 years of solitary living. At 45, Marcus was a weathered man whose once dark hair had begun showing streaks of silver, his face lined by decades of harsh desert sun and wind. His calloused hands moved methodically as he cleaned his rifle, the familiar ritual providing comfort in the vast silence that surrounded his isolated homestead. 20 years since he had fled civilization after losing everything that mattered to him in a single devastating day. 20 years since he had spoken to another human being for more than the brief exchanges required when he rode into Tucson twice a year for supply. His ranch, built with his own hands in a hidden valley 40 miles from the nearest settlement, had become both his sanctuary and his prison. The sound of approaching footsteps on his wooden porch shattered the desert silence like a gunshot. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered Colt 45. In 2 decades of living in Apache territory, no one had ever approached his ranch. The local Apache bands knew of his presence but had left him alone, perhaps respecting his obvious desire for solitude, or perhaps simply seeing no threat in a single hermit living among the rock and cacti. The footsteps were light, unsteady, and definitely human. Marcus moved silently to the window, peering through a crack in the wooden What he saw made his breath catch in his throat and his heart pound with a mixture of shock and disbelief. A woman stood on his porch, an Apache woman by her features and long black hair. But that wasn't what made Marcus's hands tremble as he reached for the door latch. She was completely naked, her bronze skin gleaming in the moonlight, her body bearing the unmistakable marks of violence and abuse. Even in the dim light, he could see bruises, cuts, and what appeared to be rope burns around her wrists and ankles. But it was her face that truly stopped him cold. Despite the swelling around one eye and the cut on her lip, his breathtaking, high cheekbones, full lips, and dark eyes that held a mixture of desperation and fierce determination. Her body, though marked by recent trauma, was that of a young woman in the prime of life, with curves that spoke of strength and vitality beneath the obvious signs of... She knocked again, the sound weak and hesitant, and Marcus could hear her voice through the thick wooden door, a stream of Apache words he didn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Then, switching to broken English, she spoke words that would haunt him. "Please, help me. They come soon. Please." Marcus stood frozen for a long moment, his mind racing through the implication of opening that door. In 20 years of isolation, he had built a life based on avoiding exactly this kind of situation, human contact and problem and complication. Opening that door would shatter the carefully constructed walls he had built around his heart and his life. But as he heard her voice again, weaker now, tinged with exhaustion, despair, something deep inside him he thought had long ago stirred to life. He had been many things in his 45 years, soldier, husband, father, rancher, but he had never been the kind of man who could turn away from someone in desperate need. With hands that shook more than they had in decades, Marcus unlatched the door and pulled it open. The woman swayed on her feet as the door opened, and Marcus caught her just as she began to collapse. The contact sent an electric shock through his system. It had been 20 years since he had touched another human being, and the sensation of her warm skin against his hands was almost overwhelming. Up close, even in her battered condition, her beauty was even more striking. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of natural elegance that no amount of abuse diminished. Her dark eyes, though clouded with pain and exhaustion, held an intelligence and strength that spoke of a woman who had endured terrible things but had not been broken by them. "Easy now," Marcus said softly, his voice rusty from disuse. "I've got you. You're safe now." She looked up at him with those remarkable dark eyes, and for a moment he saw something like hope flicker across her. Then her strength gave out, and she collapsed against his chest, unconscious. Marcus stood there for a moment, holding this mysterious woman, his mind spinning with questions and concerns. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most importantly, who was coming for her? As if in answer to his thoughts, the distant sound of horses reached his ears, multiple riders, moving fast across the desert toward his ranch. His blood ran cold as he realized that whoever had done this to her was following her trail, and they would be here soon. Moving quickly, Marcus carried the unconscious woman inside, grabbing a blanket from his bed to cover her. He laid her gently on his simple wooden couch, then moved to his gun cabinet, pulling out his Winchester rifle and checking whatever was coming, he would be ready for it. The sound of the horses grew closer, and Marcus could now hear voices, rough, angry voices speaking in English. Not Apache then, but white men. The implications of that made his stomach turn with disgust and rage. He moved to the window again, and in the moonlight he could see them. 5 men on horseback, armed and looking like the kind of frontier trash that made honest settlers' lives miserable. They were following track, and those straight to the lead rider, a tall man with a cruel face and the bearing of someone accustomed to violence, raised his hand to halt the group about 50 yards from the ranch. Marcus could hear their conversation clearly in the still desert air. She came this way, carrying the kind of casual cruelty that made Marcus's trigger finger itch. Tracks lead right to that cabin. Think the hermit's got her? Another rider, this one younger, but no less vicious. Don't matter what I think. We're going to search that place top to bottom. Can't have her getting away and talking to the wrong people about what she's seen. Marcus felt his jaw clench. Whatever these men had done to the woman now unconscious on his couch, they were clearly willing to kill to keep it secret, and they obviously had no qualms about killing him too if he got in their way. But as he looked back at the woman, beautiful, broken stranger had stumbled into his carefully ordered world, Marcus realized that his 20 years of isolation were about to come to an abrupt end. He had spent 2 decades running from human connection, from responsibility, from the possibility of loss and pain. Tonight, all of that was going to change. The riders began moving toward his house again, and Marcus could see them spreading out to surround the building. They weren't planning to knock politely and ask questions. They were planning to take what they wanted by force. Marcus checked his weapons one more time, then moved to a position where he could defend both the door and the window. Whatever came next, he was going to protect the woman who had brought the outside world crashing back into his life. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Sullivan had something worth fighting for besides his own solitude. And as the sound of approaching danger grew closer, he discovered that some things, like the instinct to protect the innocent, never truly died, no matter how deeply they were buried. The first 20 years of his isolation were ending tonight. What would begin in their place remained to be seen, but Marcus knew with absolute certainty that his life would never be the same again. The naked Apache woman on his couch stirred slightly, murmuring something in her native tongue, and Marcus made a silent promise to her unconscious form. Whatever had brought her to his door, whatever dangers were following in her wake, he would see her safely through them, even if it cost him everything he had spent 20 years building, defending what mattered. The 5 riders approached Marcus's ranch house with the confidence of men who had never encountered serious resistance. Their leader, a man named Jake Brennan, whose reputation for cruelty extended throughout the Arizona territory, dismounted and signaled for his men to take positions around the small cabin. Brennan was the kind of man who took what he wanted and eliminated anyone who stood in his way, and tonight he wanted the Apache woman back. Not because he cared about her, but because she had witnessed something that could destroy him and his operation. Marcus watched from his window as the men positioned themselves, noting their movements and planning his response. He had spent 4 years as a cavalry soldier before settling down to ranch life. The tactical part of his mind automatically began calculating angles, cover position, and fields of fire. These men might be used to intimidating farmers and townspeople, but they had never faced someone with his training and experience. "You in the house," Brennan called out, his voice carrying the kind of arrogant authority that came from years of unopposed brutality. "We know you got our property in there. Send her out, and we'll be on our way. No harm, no foul." Marcus remained silent, his finger resting lightly on the trigger of his Winchester. Behind him, the Apache woman stirred slightly on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. Even semi-conscious and battered, her beauty was striking in the lamplight. Her dark eyes found his face, and he saw both gratitude and fear warring their depth. "My name is Marcus," quietly, not taking his eyes off the window. "You're safe here. I won't let them—" She tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "Aiasha," she managed to say, touching her chest weakly. "My name, Aiasha." The sound of her voice, even weakened by trauma, was melodious and gentle. Marcus nodded to acknowledge her introduction, then returned his attention to the men outside. "Last chance, Hermit," Brennan shouted. "That Apache girl belongs to us. We paid good money for her, and we aim to get our property back." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Paid money for her. The implications were clear and sickening. These men weren't just criminals. They were slavers, dealing in human flesh in defiance of both American and Apache law. "There's no property here," Marcus called back, his voice carrying the desert air with deadly calm. "Just a woman under my protection. I suggest you ride." Brennan's laughter and mocking. "Your protection? Old man, you've been living alone out here so long you forgot how the world works. That girl's coming with us, one way or another. Then you'll have to come through me." And something in his tone made even Brennan pause. Behind him, Aiasha struggled to sit up, the blanket slipping slightly to reveal the full extent of her injuries. Marcus caught a glimpse of rope burns around her wrists, bruises on her ribs, and other marks that spoke of systematic abuse. Jaw clenched with rage as he understood what she had endured. They killed my family." Her voice growing stronger as consciousness fully returned. "Took me, sold me to men in Tucson. I escaped, ran for 3 days. Us." Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. These weren't just criminals who had stumbled across a lone Apache woman. They were part of an organized network that was kidnapping, enslaving, and selling human beings. And Aiasha had seen enough to destroy them all. How many others? "Many," she replied, tears beginning to flow down her bruised cheeks. "Apache women, Mexican girls, even some white women who ask too many questions. They keep them in place outside town." Terrible. The picture became clearer, and Marcus's resolve hardened to steel. This wasn't just about protecting one woman anymore. This was about stopping something evil that had been festering in his territory while he lived in willful ignorance. "Aiasha," turning to look at her directly, "can you handle a rifle?" Despite her injuries, he saw a spark of fierce determination in her dark eyes. "Yes. My father taught me to hunt and fight before—" She gestured toward her battered body. Marcus moved to his gun cabinet and pulled out a second Winchester, checking the action and handing it to her along with a box of ammunition. "There are 5 of them. If they get past me, don't hesitate." She nodded, accepting the weapon with hands that trembled slightly, but gripped it with obvious familiarity. Even wrapped in a blanket and bearing the marks of recent trauma, she held herself with the dignity and strength of a warrior. Outside, Brennan was growing impatient. "All right, boys," Marcus heard him. "Looks like we're going to have to do this the hard way. Tommy, you and Snake take the back. Billy, circle around to the east window. I'll take the front door." Marcus smiled grimly. These men had made a fatal error. They were treating this like intimidating an isolated farmer, not assaulting the home of someone who knew how to fight back. As the first man reached the front porch, Marcus made his presence known. His Winchester barked once, and the man stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder and screaming in pain and surprise. "Next one won't be a warning shot, Marcus. Last chance to ride away." The response was immediate and violent. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions as Brennan's men opened up on the cabin, bullets thudding into the thick log walls and shattering the glass in one window. Marcus dropped below the windowsill and moved to a firing position where he could cover multiple approaches. His first real shot took down the man trying to circle to the east window, and his second sent another diving for cover behind the water trough. "There's only one of them," Brennan shouted over the gunfire. "Rush him!" But as 2 men charged the front door, Aiasha's rifle spoke from the back window, her shot catching one of the attackers in the leg and sending him crashing to the ground. Despite everything she had endured, her aim was steady and true. The firefight continued for several minutes, with Marcus and Aiasha holding their ground against the attackers. Marcus found himself impressed by the Apache woman's skill and courage. Even wounded and traumatized, she fought with the fierce determination of someone who had already lost everything and refused to lose anything. Gradually, superior position and better marksmen. 2 of Brennan's men were down with serious wounds, and the others were pinned behind in cover. Marcus could hear them arguing among themselves about whether to continue the assault. "This ain't worth it, Jay," one of the men. That hermit knows how to shoot, and the girl's got a rifle, too. We can't leave witnesses, snarled back. You know what'll happen if word gets back to the boss about tonight? But Marcus could hear the doubt in the man's. The easy assault had turned into a real fight, and his men were getting cut to pieces. Taking advantage of a lull in the gunfire, Marcus called out, Brennan, I know who you are and what you've been doing. End this now, and maybe some of your men live to see morning. You don't know nothing, old man, Brennan shouted back, but there was desperation in his voice now. I know about this slave op outside Tucson, Marcus. I know you've been taking Apache women and selling them, and I know this woman saw enough to hang you all. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus had clearly hit his mark. Brennan and his men knew they were in serious trouble if word of their activities reached the territorial authorities. After a long moment, Marcus heard movement outside, the sound of men retreating, helping their wounded companions away from the cabin. Brennan's voice carried across the desert one last time, full of venom and promise. This ain't over, hermit. You got no idea what you've stepped into. Marcus listened as the surviving members of the gang mounted their horses and rode away into the night, their retreat accompanied by the groans of wounded men and the angry curses of their leader. When the sound of hoofbeats finally faded into the distance, Marcus lowered his rifle and turned to check on Aiasha. She was still positioned at the back window, her weapon ready, but he could see the exhaustion and pain beginning to overcome the adrenaline that sustained her. They're gone. Moving to, but they'll be back, probably. Setting down. Thank you. You could have given me to them. Would have been so. Come. Marcus looked at this remarkable woman, this beautiful, broken, courageous stranger who had brought violence and purpose back into his carefully isolated world. 20 years of solitude had ended tonight, and he found himself caring about another human being for the first time since he had lost his family. No, he said quietly, that wouldn't have been safer. That would have been giving up everything that makes life worth living. As he helped her back to the couch, Marcus realized that whatever came next, whether Brennan returned with an army or the territorial authorities got involved, his hermit days were over. He had something to protect now, something that mattered more than his own safety or peace of mind. For the first time in 20 years, Marcus Sullivan was no longer alone, and despite the danger that surrounded them, he discovered that he wouldn't have it any other way. Healing and hidden truth. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert with the gradual warmth that Marcus had grown accustomed to over his 20 years of solitude. But today, everything felt different. For the first time in decades, he wasn't alone as he watched the sun paint the eastern mountain in shades of gold and crimson. Aiasha lay sleeping on his couch, her breathing finally steady and peaceful after the trauma of the Marcus had spent the dark hours keeping watch, alternating between checking on his unexpected guest and scanning the horizon for signs of Brennan's return. The outlaw's threat still echoed in his mind, and he knew this respite was temporary. Men like Brennan didn't give up easily, especially when their criminal enterprise threatened exposure. As the morning light grew stronger, Marcus could see Aiasha more clearly. Even with the bruises and cuts marking her bronze skin, her beauty was breathtaking. She was perhaps 25 years old, with the kind of elegant bone structure that spoke of noble Apache bloodline. Her long black hair, tangled and dirty from her ordeal, still gleamed like silk in the lamplight. Her body, though marked by recent, showed the strength and grace of a woman raised in the traditional Apache way, strong enough to survive in the harsh desert, graceful enough to move like flowing water. But it was her face that truly captivated him. Even in sleep there was something regal, a dignity that no amount of abuse could diminish. Her full lips, cut and swollen, still held a natural beauty that made Marcus's breath. This was a woman who had been raised as someone important, not a common captive. Around mid-morning, Aiasha began to stir. Her dark eyes opened slowly, immediately alert despite her injury, the trained wariness of someone who had learned to expect danger at every moment. When she saw Marcus sitting nearby, cleaning his rifle, some of the tension left her body. You stayed awake all night. Her English clearer now that was fully conscious, watching for them. Someone had to, setting the weapon. How are you feeling? Aiasha attempted to sit up, wincing as various injuries made themselves known. Like I was dragged behind a horse for miles, she said with a wry smile formed her. But alive, thanks to Marcus moved to help her, and as his hands gently supported her, he was struck again by the electric of human contact after so many years alone. Her skin was warm and soft despite the rope burns on her wrists, and he found himself reluctant to break the contact. We need to tend to those wounds properly, forcing himself to focus on practical matters. And get some food in you, you're too thin. They didn't feed us much, replied Matter, just enough to keep us alive for their purpose. The casual way she spoke of her ordeal made Marcus's anger flare again. He had seen enough cruelty during his cavalry days, but there was something particularly vile about what had been done to this woman and others. Tell me about this operation. He gathered medical. How long has it been going on? Aiasha accepted a cup of water gratefully before beginning her story. Brennan and his men, they work for someone important in Tucson, someone with money and connection. They raid Apache camps, take young women, and sell them to wealthy men who want exotic servants. She paused to drink more, her hands shaking slightly as memories surfaced. My family was camping near the river. My father was a respected war chief, my mother the daughter of a medicine man. They killed everyone except the young women. Marcus felt his jaw clench as he imagined the scene. How many women did they take? 12 from my village? Aiasha. But when they brought us to their holding place, there were already 20 others there. Apache, Mexican, even 2 white women who had been asking questions about missing people. Where is this place? 2 days' ride from Tucson, hidden in a canyon. They have guards, walls, cages. Her voice broke, and Marcus saw tears beginning to form in her dark eyes. Without thinking, Marcus reached out and gently touched her hand. The contact seemed to give her strength, and she continued her story. I was there for 3 weeks before I found a chance to escape. One of the guards grew careless, and I managed to steal a knife. I killed him and ran. Her voice held no remorse, only grim satisfaction. Marcus nodded approvingly. In this harsh land, survival often required violent action, and he respected her doing what was necessary. They'll be looking for you everywhere, and they know you can identify their operation. Yes, that's why they followed me here. They can't let me reach the authorities. Marcus was quiet for considering options. The nearest territorial marshal is in Tucson. 3 days' ride, and we'd have to get past Brennan's men to reach him. There's another way, Aiasha had hesitated. My uncle, Geronimo's brother Naichi, leads a band that moves through these mountains. If we could reach them, they would help us rescue the other women. The name Geronimo sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The famous Apache leader was still actively fighting the U.S. Army, and any association with his family would be seen as treason by the territorial authority. That's a dangerous path. Carefully. All paths are dangerous, but my uncle's warriors are the only ones with the skill to assault Brennan's stronghold. As Marcus began cleaning and bandaging her wounds, he found himself studying her face in the morning light. Despite everything she had endured, there was no defeat in her expression, only determination to see justice done and other captive. Why are you helping? You could have turned me away. Marcus paused in his ministration, her question forcing him to examine his own motivation. 20 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter to Apache raiders, he said finally. I came out here to escape the pain, to avoid caring about anyone ever again. Ayasha's eyes widened with understanding, and perhaps some wariness. And now you help an Apache woman? Now I realize that the men who killed my family were no different from Brennan and his slavers, Marcus. Evil exists in all races, just as good does. You're not responsible for what happened to my family anymore. Then I'm responsible for what the U.S. Army has done to Apache village. The simple honesty of his words seemed to touch something deep inside her. For the first time since awakening, Aiasha smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her battered face into something radiant. You are a good man, Marcus Sullivan, she said softly, a man of honor. The way she spoke his name, with her musical voice and slight accent, made something stir in Marcus's chest that he hadn't felt in this beautiful, courageous woman was awakening feelings he had thought were permanently buried. We should prepare to leave, forcing on practice. Brennan will be back, probably with more men, and every day we delay, more women suffer. Aiasha nodded, attempting to stand. Though she was still weak from her ordeal, Marcus could see the strength returning to her body. She was naturally graceful, moving with the fluid economy of motion that was characteristic of her people. I'll need clothes, she said, looking down at the blanket, her only covering. Marcus rummaged through his belongings and found some of his smaller shirts and pants fit her. As she dressed, he caught glimpses of her figure, the curves of her hips, the graceful line of her neck, the proud set of her shoulders. Even in men's clothing that was too large for her, she was strikingly beautiful. "There's something else you should know," Aiasha, as she adjusted the overshirt. "The man Brennan works for, he's planning to expand his operation. They're going to start taking children next." Marcus felt his blood run cold. The idea of children being subjected to what Aiasha had endured made his vision blur with rage. "Then we stop this now," he said, "whatever it takes." As they prepared to leave the ranch that had been Marcus's sanctuary for 20 years, he found himself looking around at the simple cabin and sparse furnishing that had comprised his entire world. Everything was about to, and there was no going back to the safety. But as he watched Aiasha check the action on the rifle he had given her, saw the determination in her dark eyes, the proud tilt of her head, Marcus realized he didn't want. For the first time in decades, he had found something worth fighting for, something that gave his life meaning beyond mere survival. The hermit was dead. In his place stood a man with a mission, a protector, and perhaps, if he was very lucky, a man who might find love again in the most unexpected of places. Together they rode out into the desert, leaving behind 20 years of isolation and heading toward a confrontation that would test everything they had learned about courage, justice, and the power of two people to make a difference in a harsh and unforgiving love and just in the desert. 3 months after the dramatic rescue of 32 enslaved women from Brennan's hidden compound, Marcus stood on the porch of his rebuilt ranch house, watching Aiasha tend to the vegetable garden they had planted together. The raid, carried out with the help of her uncle Nietzsche's warriors and a sympathetic territorial marshal, had been a complete success. Brennan and his associate were either dead or facing life in prison, and their powerful backer in Tucson had fled the terror. The ranch looked different now, larger, more welcoming, with additions Marcus had built to accommodate the new life he and Aiasha were creating together. What had once been a hermit's isolated refuge had become a home where laughter and conversation filled the rooms that had known only silence for 20 years. Aiasha had grown even more beautiful as she healed from her ordeal. Her bronze skin glowed with health, her long black hair shone like silk in the desert sun, and her graceful figure had filled out as proper nutrition replaced the starvation diet of captivity. But it was the joy in her dark eyes that truly transformed her, the happiness of a woman who had found love and safety after unimaginable suffering. "The corn is growing well," she called to him in English, which had improved dramatically over the months they had spent together. "Your soil is good, Marcus." "Our soil," he corrected with a smile, walking down to join her in the garden. The correction wasn't just semantic. 2 weeks earlier, in a simple ceremony conducted by a territorial judge with Nietzsche and several Apache elders as witnesses, Marcus and Aiasha had been married. It had been an unprecedented union, a white rancher and an Apache woman, two people from different worlds brought together by tragedy and forged into an unbreakable bond by love. Not everyone approved. Some of the Anglo settlers in the area viewed their marriage with suspicion and hostility, while certain members of Aiasha's tribe questioned her choice to marry outside their people. But Marcus and Aiasha had faced down worse opposition than disapproving neighbors, and their love had only grown stronger in the face of adversity. "The territorial governor wants to meet with us next month," Marcus said, as they worked together among the growing plants. "He's planning to use our story to promote better relations between Apache bands and white settlers." Aiasha nodded thoughtfully. "It would be good if our marriage could help bring peace. Too much blood has been spilled on both sides." Marcus admired her wisdom, her generous spirit. Despite everything she had suffered at the hands of white criminals, she harbored no hatred toward his people as a whole. Instead, she worked tirelessly to build bridges between the two cultures, teaching him Apache customs while learning the ways of frontier ranch life. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "The territorial marshal wants to offer me a position as a special deputy, working to stop other slave operations in the territory." "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd discuss it with my wife first," Marcus replied, reaching out to take her hand. "This decision affects both of us." Aiasha squeezed his fingers, her touch sending the same electric thrill through him that it had since that first night when he caught her collapsing his porch. "What does your heart tell you?" Marcus considered. His hermit days were long behind him, replaced by a life of purpose and meaning he had never imagined. "My heart tells me that we have skills and knowledge that would save other women like you, but it would mean danger, travel, time away from our home." Then we do it. A life without purpose is no life at all. Her immediate agreement didn't surprise him. In the months since their first meeting, he had learned that Aiasha possessed a warrior's heart beneath her feminine beauty. She was as quick with a rifle as she was with a kind word, as fierce in protecting others as she was gentle. Private. That evening, as he sat on the porch watching the desert sunset, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them. 6 months earlier, he had been a bitter hermit, hiding from life and human connection. Now he was a married man with a mission, surrounded by love and purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up the traditional Apache life to marry a white rancher?" Aiasha turned to look at her dark eyes, soft with, "Do you regret opening your door that night?" "Never," Marcus. "Then you have your answer," leaning again. "My life began the night I knocked on your door. Everything before that." Marcus wrapped his arms around, marveling at how perfect he fit against him. Their marriage had been a revelation in every way, not just the physical passion they shared, but the deep emotional connection that grew stronger each day. They balanced each other perfectly. His careful planning complemented her intuitive wisdom. His years of frontier experience meshed with her knowledge of Apache ways. His steady strength provided the foundation for her fierce spirit. "I love you," her hair, "and I love you, my brave hermit who learned to live again," turning in his arms to kiss him, the passion that never failed to between them. As the stars emerged over the Arizona desert, Marcus and Aiasha made plans for their future. They would accept the marshal's offer and work together to hunt down other slave operations in the territory. They would continue building bridges between Apache and Anglo communities, and someday, when their work was done, they would return to this ranch and raise the children they both longed for. The knock on his door that night 6 months ago had indeed changed everything. It had ended 20 years of solitude and begun a love story that would become legend in the Arizona territory, the tale of a hermit rancher and an Apache woman who found in each other not just love, but a shared purpose that would make the frontier a safer place for everyone. Their story was just beginning, but already Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Love had conquered the barriers of race and culture, and justice had triumphed over evil. In the harsh desert that had once seemed like the end of the world, two broken souls had found healing, hope, and a happiness that would last for all their days. As they walked hand in hand back to their house, their home, Marcus smiled at the thought that the best chapter of his life had begun with a desperate knock in the darkness. Sometimes the greatest gifts came in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes the most beautiful love stories began with the simplest act of human kindness. The hermit was gone forever, replaced by a man who had rediscovered what it meant to truly live, and beside him walked the extraordinary woman who had made it all possible. His wife, his partner, his salvation, and the love of his